Josh Brennan walked into the restaurant, already rehearsing his escape excuses. His sister Maya had promised this blind date would change his life. He just needed to survive 1 hour, maybe less. Then the front door swung open, and his chest tightened. The woman scanning the room was Ivy Parker, the inventory coordinator from his warehouse, the one who sent passive-aggressive emails about his shift's discrepancies every single week. Before Josh could process anything, Ivy checked her phone, looked up, and headed straight for his table. Table 12. His table. Her face carried the same tight expression she wore during every shift handoff, already irritated. Ivy stopped at the edge of table 12, her eyes narrowing as she recognized the man sitting there. Josh watched her expression shift from confusion to disbelief to something that looked a lot like barely contained frustration. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The restaurant hummed around them, clinking glasses, soft music, murmured conversations. But the silence at table 12 felt louder than all of it. "You're at my table," Ivy finally said, her voice flat. Josh shook his head slowly. "This is table 12. I was told to be at table 12. He pulled out his phone and held up the text from Maya as proof. Ivy responded by showing him her own screen, a message from someone named Keisha with the exact same instructions. The restaurant name, 7 o'clock, table 12, and a promise that her date would already be waiting. Josh stared at the two phones side by side, the identical details glaring back at him. His brain refused to connect the dots at first because the conclusion was too absurd. There had to be a mistake, a mix-up with the reservation, another table 12 somewhere in this building, anything but the obvious answer forming in his mind. "Who set you up?" he asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. Ivy's jaw tightened. "My friend Keisha. She said she knew someone perfect for me." The word perfect came out like she was spitting out something bitter. Josh felt a headache building behind his eyes. His sister Maya had used that exact same word 3 days ago when she'd cornered him in his own kitchen and refused to leave until he agreed to this blind date. She had stood there with her arms crossed, insisting that this woman was different, that she was exactly what Josh needed, that he couldn't keep using Zoe as an excuse to avoid living his life. "My sister Maya set this up," Josh said slowly. "She told me my date would be waiting at this table." The realization hit them both at the same time. Josh saw it land on Ivy's face. The flash of understanding followed immediately by horror. Keisha and Maya. Somehow, those two had coordinated this entire disaster. They had conspired to put Josh and Ivy in the same restaurant, at the same table, without telling either of them who they were actually meeting. "This is a joke," Ivy said, but her voice lacked conviction. Josh wished it were. He wished he could laugh and walk away and pretend this never happened. But he knew Maya, and he knew how determined she could be when she decided something was good for him. 3 years of gentle suggestions had turned into aggressive interventions over the past 6 months. She worried about him. She thought he was lonely. She believed that raising Zoe alone was slowly turning him into a hermit who only left the house for work and grocery runs. Maybe she wasn't entirely wrong, but that didn't give her the right to ambush him like this. Ivy was still standing, her purse clutched against her side like a shield. Josh could see her calculating her options. Walk out now and deal with Keisha's questions later, or stay and endure an hour of awkwardness with a coworker she clearly couldn't stand. He understood the dilemma because he was running the same calculations himself. "If I leave," Ivy said, more to herself than to him, "Keisha will never let it go. She'll want to know why. She'll push for details, and then she'll try again with someone else." Josh nodded grimly. "Maya's the same way. She'll show up at my house tomorrow with a new plan, and twice the enthusiasm." He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the tension knotted there. "She means well. She just doesn't understand that I'm not interested in dating right now." Ivy's expression flickered. Something shifted behind her eyes, though Josh couldn't read what. She glanced toward the exit, then back at him, then at the empty chair across from where he sat. The calculation continued. Josh found himself holding his breath without meaning to, waiting for her decision, even though he wasn't sure which outcome he preferred. 1 hour, Ivy said abruptly. We eat dinner like adults. We make polite conversation. And then we tell them it didn't work out, and they leave us alone. Josh blinked. That's your plan? Do you have a better one? She pulled out the chair and sat down before he could answer, setting her purse on the floor beside her with the decisive motion of someone who had made up her mind. Look, I don't like this any more than you do, but if we leave now, they'll just try again. If we stay and give it an honest shot, or at least pretend to, they'll have to accept that we're incompatible and move on. There was logic in her argument, even if every instinct in Josh's body screamed at him to flee. He thought about Maya's inevitable interrogation, the disappointed look she would give him, the guilt trip that would follow. He thought about having this same conversation in a month with a different stranger at a different restaurant. And then again, after that, an endless cycle of blind dates until Maya finally gave up, or Josh lost his mind entirely. 1 hour, he agreed, and then we never speak of this again. Ivy nodded once, sharply, like they were closing a business deal. Agreed. What happens at table 12 stays at table 12. The waiter appeared then, cheerful and oblivious to the tension radiating from their table. He introduced himself as Derek and listed the evening's specials with practiced enthusiasm, while Josh and Ivy sat in stiff silence, both pretending to study their menus with intense focus. Josh ordered a steak without really caring what he ate. Ivy asked for the salmon. They both requested water instead of wine, neither willing to risk lowered inhibitions making this situation worse. When Derek bounced away to place their order, the silence returned. Josh drummed his fingers against the tablecloth, searching for something neutral to say. Every topic that came to mind connected somehow to work. The new inventory system, the upcoming holiday rush, the incident last month when an entire pallet of electronics went missing and caused a 3-day investigation. None of it seemed appropriate for a dinner that was supposed to feel like a date, even a fake one. Ivy broke first. We should probably talk about something other than work. I was just thinking the same thing. Good. She folded her hands on the table, her posture still rigid. So, you have a daughter. Josh felt a small spark of surprise that she knew, followed by the reminder that warehouses were gossip factories. Everyone knew everyone's business whether you wanted them to or not. Zoe, she's 8. Ivy nodded but didn't offer any follow-up questions. Josh waited, expecting the usual responses he got when people learned he was a single dad. The sympathetic head tilt, the probing questions about his ex-wife, the unsolicited advice about work-life balance. Instead, Ivy just sat there, apparently satisfied with the basic facts. The silence stretched on. Josh watched the other diners around them, couples leaning close, friends laughing over shared appetizers, a family with 2 young kids trying to contain the chaos at their corner booth. Everyone else seemed to know how to do this, how to sit across from another person and simply exist together. He had forgotten how. 3 years of solo parenting had stripped away whatever social skills he'd once possessed, leaving behind a man who could negotiate nap schedules and referee arguments about screen time, but couldn't carry a simple dinner conversation. 53 minutes left. Josh checked his watch and tried not to count the seconds. Their food arrived, and Josh had never been so grateful to see a steak in his life. At least eating gave them something to do, besides stare at each other in uncomfortable silence. He cut into his meat methodically, chewing slowly, buying time. Across from him, Ivy picked at her salmon with the same deliberate pace, neither of them willing to rush toward the conversation they both knew was inevitable. So, Josh tried again, grasping for any topic that might fill the silence. The new barcode scanners. They're supposed to roll out next month. Ivy's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down and fixed him with a look that made him feel like he'd just failed a test he didn't know he was taking. "We said no work talk." "Right. Sorry." Josh took another bite of steak, chewing longer than necessary. The problem was that work was the only thing they had in common, or at least the only thing he knew they had in common. Outside of shift handoffs and inventory reports, Ivy Parker was a complete stranger to him. He knew she was precise with numbers, that she noticed discrepancies his team missed, that she sent emails with bullet points and expected responses within 24 hours. Beyond that, nothing. The silence stretched on until it became almost physically uncomfortable. Josh could feel the pressure building in his chest, the desperate need to say something, anything, to break the tension. He opened his mouth without a plan, hoping words would simply appear. "Why does Kesha think you need to be set up?" The question came out more bluntly than he intended. "I mean, you seem like you'd have no trouble finding someone on your own." Ivy's eyebrows rose slightly, whether at the question itself or at the implied compliment buried within it. Josh couldn't tell. She took a sip of water before answering. "I could ask you the same thing. Maya seems convinced you're wasting away in solitude." "I'm not wasting away. I'm raising my daughter." The defensiveness crept into his voice before he could stop it. "There's a difference." "I didn't say there wasn't." Ivy's tone remained neutral, almost clinical. "But you've been divorced for 3 years. That's a long time to use a child as a shield against human connection." The words landed like a slap. Josh felt heat rise to his face, anger or embarrassment. He wasn't sure which. "I'm not using Zoe as a shield. She's my priority. Everything else comes second." "Including yourself?" Josh didn't have an answer for that. He stabbed at his steak with more force than necessary, the knife scraping against the plate with an unpleasant screech. Who was Ivy Parker to psychoanalyze him? She didn't know anything about his life, his choices, the reasons behind the walls he'd built. She was just the woman who flagged his inventory errors and made his job harder than it needed to be. "What about you?" he shot back, aware that he sounded petty and not caring. "You've been at that warehouse for 2 years, and I've never once heard you mention a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or anyone at all. What's your excuse?" Something flickered across Ivy's face, a crack in the composed exterior she wore like armor. It disappeared so quickly Josh almost thought he'd imagined it. "My job takes focus," she said evenly. "Relationships require time and energy that I prefer to invest elsewhere." "Sounds like an excuse to me." "Takes one to know one." They glared at each other across the table. Two people who had spent 18 months as polite strangers, suddenly confronting the friction that had always simmered beneath the surface. Josh realized, with a jolt of surprise, that this was the most honest conversation he'd had with anyone outside his family in years, even if it felt more like a fight than a connection. The waiter appeared to refill their water glasses, his cheerful demeanor faltering slightly as he sensed the tension. He retreated quickly, leaving them alone again with their cold food and colder silence. Josh set down his fork. "Look, this was a bad idea. We're obviously not compatible, so let's just finish eating and go home." Ivy nodded, and for a moment it seemed like they would spend the rest of the hour in silence. Then, unexpectedly, she spoke again. "Zoe plays soccer, right? On the weekend league?" The question caught Josh off guard. "Yeah, how did you know that?" A strange expression crossed Ivy's face, something that looked almost like reluctance mixed with amusement. "What's her team name?" "The Thunderbolts. Why?" Ivy let out a small breath, shaking her head slightly. "I'm Coach Ivy." Josh's brain took several seconds to process those 3 words. Coach Ivy. The name Zoe had been mentioning for months, the woman she adored and quoted constantly, and drew pictures of during her free time. "Coach Ivy says we should always keep our eyes on the ball. Coach Ivy taught us a new drill today. Coach Ivy is the best coach in the whole world. He had heard the name 100 times without ever connecting it to the stern inventory coordinator who made his work life difficult. "You're kidding," he managed. "I wish I were." Ivy actually smiled, a small, reluctant curve of her lips that transformed her face entirely. She looked younger, softer, nothing like the woman who sent tersely worded emails about missing shipments. "I've been coaching that team for 2 seasons. Your daughter is one of my best players." Josh sat back in his chair, trying to reconcile the 2 versions of Ivy in his mind. The one he knew from work, precise, demanding, always finding fault, and the one Zoe described with breathless admiration. He had imagined Coach Ivy as someone warm and nurturing, the kind of person who gave hugs after games and brought orange slices for the team. That image didn't match the woman sitting across from him at all. "Zoe talks about you constantly," he admitted. "She thinks you walk on water." Ivy's smile widened slightly. "She's a good kid, enthusiastic, a little chaotic on the field, but she's learning." Chaotic is one word for it. Josh found himself almost smiling back. Last week she accidentally scored on her own goal because she got distracted by a dog on the sidelines. "I remember. She was devastated until I told her that professional players do the same thing sometimes." Ivy's voice had changed, warmer now, less guarded. "She recovered pretty quickly after that." The tension at the table shifted, rearranging itself into something less hostile. Josh studied Ivy with new eyes, seeing for the first time the person beneath the professional veneer. She cared about his daughter. She took time out of her weekends to coach a group of 8-year-olds, teaching them teamwork and resilience and how to handle disappointment. That wasn't something a cold, demanding person would do. "Why are you so different at work?" The question slipped out before Josh could stop it. Ivy's expression flickered. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're not like this at the warehouse. There, you're all about the numbers. Everything has to be perfect. Every discrepancy has to be documented. Every mistake gets an email." He gestured vaguely at the space between them. "But with the kids, you're patient, understanding. You told Zoe that professional players score own goals just to make her feel better." For a long moment, Ivy didn't respond. She traced a finger along the rim of her water glass, her gaze distant. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before. "The warehouse is different. My job is to make sure everything is accurate, because when things go wrong, people get blamed. People lose jobs. I've seen it happen. Someone makes a mistake with inventory. The numbers don't add up. And suddenly, they're being walked out by security." She looked up at him, her eyes serious. "I'm not trying to make your life difficult. I'm trying to make sure no one gets fired because of an error that could have been caught earlier." Josh felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of the resentment he had carried for months. He had never considered that perspective before. To him, Ivy's constant corrections had felt like attacks, personal criticisms designed to undermine his team. But she wasn't attacking. She was protecting. The realization made him feel slightly ashamed of every frustrated thought he'd ever had about her. "I didn't know that," he said quietly, "about why you do it. Most people don't ask." They sat with that for a moment, the restaurant noise filling the space between them. Josh noticed that he had stopped checking his watch. The hour no longer felt like a prison sentence to be endured. Somewhere along the way, without either of them planning it, this disaster of a blind date had transformed into something almost resembling a real conversation. "My ex-wife used to say I put too much pressure on myself," Josh offered, surprising himself with the admission. "That I took everything too seriously and couldn't relax. Maybe she was right." Ivy tilted her head slightly. "Is that why you divorced?" "That was part of it. She wanted someone who could be spontaneous, who could leave the dishes in the sink and take a last-minute trip to Vegas. I wanted someone who would remember to pick up Zoe from daycare and actually show up when she said she would." He shrugged, the old hurt dulled by time but still present. "We wanted different things. It took us 6 years of marriage to figure that out. I'm sorry. Don't be. Zoe's the best thing that came out of it, and she's worth everything else. Josh meant it absolutely. Whatever pain the divorce had caused, he would go through it 1,000 times over for his daughter. Ivy nodded slowly, something like understanding in her eyes. She talks about you at practice sometimes, about how you make the best pancakes, and how you always come to her games even when you're tired. Josh felt a lump form in his throat, unexpected and unwelcome. She says that? Every week. Ivy's voice was gentle now. You're doing a good job with her, Josh. Whatever you think you're doing wrong, you're doing more right than you know. The words hit him harder than he expected. He had spent 3 years second-guessing every decision, worrying that he wasn't enough, that Zoe needed something he couldn't provide. Hearing validation from someone outside his family, from someone who had no reason to lie or soften the truth, made something tight in his chest finally release. They finished their dinner in a different kind of silence, one that felt comfortable rather than strained. When the waiter brought the check, Josh reached for it automatically, but Ivy intercepted him. We split it. This wasn't a real date. Right. But even as he agreed, Josh found himself wondering if that was still true. They walked out of the restaurant together, standing awkwardly on the sidewalk as other couples brushed past them. The night air was cool, carrying the first hints of autumn. Josh shoved his hands in his pockets, suddenly unsure what came next. So, Ivy began, then stopped. She seemed to be wrestling with something, her earlier composure wavering. This was not what I expected. No. Josh allowed himself a small smile. It really wasn't. Neither of them moved toward their cars. The 1-hour deal had expired, but neither seemed ready to acknowledge it. Finally, Ivy spoke again, her voice careful. If you wanted to do this again sometime, not as a setup, just as two people who don't hate each other as much as they thought, I wouldn't be opposed. Josh's heart did something strange in his chest. I'd like that. But we'd have to be careful, Ivy added quickly. At work, I mean. I don't want people talking, and I don't want things to get complicated with Zoe. She's my player before anything else. Agreed. We keep it separate. Whatever this is, it stays outside the warehouse. They exchanged numbers, something they should have done months ago for work purposes, but never had. As Josh drove home that night, he couldn't stop replaying the evening in his mind. Ivy Parker. Coach Ivy. The same person somehow, and yet completely different from who he had believed her to be. Maya was going to be insufferable when she found out. He decided not to tell her anything yet. Over the following weeks, Josh and Ivy developed a careful rhythm. At work, nothing changed. She still flagged his discrepancies, he still signed off on her reports, and their shift handoffs remained professionally distant. But outside the warehouse, something new was growing. They met for coffee on Tuesday mornings before Zoe woke up. They texted during lunch breaks, careful to delete the messages before returning to the floor. On weekends, Josh found himself actually looking forward to Zoe's soccer games, arriving early just to watch Ivy run drills with the team. It was Zoe who noticed first. Dad, why do you keep smiling at Coach Ivy? Josh nearly choked on his water bottle. What? I'm not smiling. Zoe gave him a look that seemed far too knowing for an 8-year-old. You are. You make a weird face every time she talks to you. That's just my regular face. Nuh-uh. Zoe crossed her arms, her expression suspicious. Are you and Coach Ivy friends now? Josh scrambled for an answer that wasn't technically a lie. We work together, remember, at the warehouse. So I guess we're coworkers. Zoe considered this, her small face scrunched in thought. But you never smiled at her before. Something's different. Before Josh could respond, the game started, and Zoe's attention shifted to the field. But the conversation lingered in Josh's mind, a warning sign he couldn't ignore. If Zoe had noticed, others would too. Maya. Kesha. They're coworkers at the warehouse. The careful bubble he and Ivy had constructed around their relationship was already developing cracks. The cracks widened faster than either of them anticipated. Maya showed up unannounced one evening to find Ivy's car in Josh's driveway. Keisha spotted them together at a coffee shop across town. Whispers started circulating at the warehouse. Knowing glances, raised eyebrows, the sudden silence when Josh entered a room. They had been so careful, and yet somehow everyone seemed to know. Ivy pulled back first. Josh felt it before she said anything. The delayed text responses, the canceled coffee dates, the way she avoided his eyes at Zoe's games. When she finally called him, her voice was strained. This is too much, too fast. Everyone knows, and everyone has opinions, and I can't think straight anymore. So we deal with it together, Josh argued. Who cares what people think? I care. Ivy's voice cracked slightly. I care because this job is all I have, and if it gets weird, I don't know what I'll do. And Zoe, she's already asking questions. What happens if this doesn't work out? I'm still her coach. I still have to see her every weekend and pretend everything's normal. Ivy, we can figure this out. I need space. The words fell like stones. I need to think. I'm sorry, Josh. I just can't do this right now. She hung up before he could respond. Josh stood in his kitchen, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to nothing. The silence of the house wrapped around him. Zoe asleep upstairs, the dishes drying in the rack, everything exactly as it should be, except for the hollow feeling spreading through his chest. The next few weeks were the hardest he had experienced since his divorce. At work, Ivy was coolly professional, their interactions stripped of any warmth they had developed. She sent her reports through email instead of delivering them in person. When they passed in the halls, she nodded politely and kept walking. Josh felt like he was grieving someone who was still alive, still present, still just out of reach. Zoe noticed the change, too. How come Coach Ivy doesn't talk to us after games anymore? Josh didn't have an answer. He just hugged his daughter a little tighter and hoped the ache in his chest would eventually fade. Everything had been right. They had found something real, something worth fighting for, and it had shattered anyway. He went through the motions, work, home, repeat, and tried not to think about what he had lost. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, marked urgent and addressed to the entire day shift team. Josh read it 3 times before the words fully registered. Corporate audit, inventory discrepancy, approximately $2,000 in missing merchandise. All-day shift personnel required to attend a mandatory meeting at 2 o'clock. Josh's stomach dropped. He knew what this meant. He had seen it happen before to other teams, other shifts. When inventory went missing, someone always took the blame. Investigations were launched, fingers were pointed, and eventually someone got walked out the door with a cardboard box of personal belongings. The fact that his team had done nothing wrong wouldn't matter if they couldn't prove it. The meeting was brutal. Regional management sat at the front of the room with printed spreadsheets and grim expressions, walking through the discrepancies line by line. Electronics, mostly. Small items that could easily disappear into a pocket or a bag. The numbers didn't lie. Somewhere between receiving and shipping, $2,000 worth of product had vanished, and the day shift was the last team to handle those items before they went missing. We're not accusing anyone specifically, the regional manager said, though his tone suggested otherwise. But until this is resolved, everyone on this shift is under review. Anyone with information should come forward immediately. Josh sat in the back row, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. Around him, his teammates exchanged nervous glances. He knew these people, had worked alongside them for years, celebrated their birthdays, covered their shifts when they had family emergencies. None of them were thieves. But proving that was another matter entirely. After the meeting, Josh pulled the shift supervisor aside. "This is wrong. My team didn't take anything." The supervisor sighed, looking tired. "I believe you, Josh. But corporate doesn't care what I believe. They care about numbers, and the numbers say we have a problem. So what happens now? They'll review the security footage, interview everyone individually, dig through the logs. The supervisor shook his head. It could take weeks, and if they don't find the real answer, they'll pick someone to blame. That's how these things always end. Josh spent the rest of his shift in a fog, going through the motions, while his mind raced through possibilities. He thought about every handoff, every shipment, every moment when something could have gone wrong. Nothing stood out. His team was careful, thorough, reliable. If merchandise was missing, the problem had to be somewhere else in the chain. A receiving error, a shipping mistake, a glitch in the system that no one had caught. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of the house. Zoe was asleep down the hall, blissfully unaware that her father's job might be on the line. Josh thought about what would happen if he got fired, the bills he wouldn't be able to pay, the stability he wouldn't be able to provide, the look on his daughter's face when he had to explain why everything was changing again. 3 days passed with no resolution. The tension at the warehouse grew thicker, the silence in the break room heavier. People stopped making small talk. Everyone was a suspect until proven otherwise, and no one wanted to say the wrong thing to the wrong person. Josh felt the weight of suspicion pressing down on him, even though he had done nothing wrong. On the 4th day, Ivy appeared at his workstation. Josh hadn't spoken to her in weeks, not since the phone call, not since she asked for space. Seeing her now, standing in front of him with a folder in her hands, felt like a punch to the chest. He kept his expression neutral, professional, even though everything inside him was screaming. "I need to show you something," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Not here." "Break room." 5 minutes. She walked away before he could respond. Josh watched her go, his heart pounding with a confusing mix of hope and dread. What could she possibly have to show him? And why now, after all this time? He found her in the corner of the empty break room, the folder open on the table in front of her. Inside were printed spreadsheets covered in highlighted sections and handwritten notes. Data logs, timestamp records, system reports that Josh didn't fully understand. Ivy looked up when he entered, her expression serious. "I found the problem," she said without preamble. "It's not theft, it's a system error." Josh sat down across from her, staring at the papers. "What do you mean?" Ivy pointed to a series of highlighted entries. "These are the transactions for the missing items. Look at the timestamps. They were scanned in twice, once at receiving, and once again when they were moved to the staging area. But the system didn't register them as duplicates. It counted them as 2 separate shipments." She flipped to another page. "When your team processed the outgoing orders, the system showed those items as still in inventory because it thought there were 2 of each. But there was only ever 1. The shortage isn't real. It's a counting error." Josh stared at the data, trying to follow her logic. "So nothing is actually missing?" "Nothing." Ivy's voice was firm. "The software update last month introduced a glitch in the scanning protocol. It's been double counting certain items and throwing off the entire inventory. I ran the numbers 3 times to make sure." She slid the folder toward him. "Your team didn't do anything wrong. I can prove it." The relief that washed over Josh was so intense, he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. Weeks of stress, nights of lost sleep, the constant fear of losing everything. And it had been a software bug the whole time. Not theft, not negligence, just a machine making the same mistake over and over again. "Why did you do this?" he asked, his voice rough. "After everything, after you said you needed space. Why help me?" Ivy's composure flickered. She looked down at the table, then back up at him, her eyes more vulnerable than he had ever seen them. "Because I couldn't watch them blame you for something you didn't do. Because I know how hard you work, and how much you care about your team." She took a breath. "And because walking away from you was a mistake. I was scared, Josh. I was scared of how fast things were moving, of how much I was starting to feel, of everything that could go wrong if I let myself care about someone again. So I ran, and I've regretted it every single day since." Josh didn't know what to say. The anger he had carried for weeks, the hurt, the confusion, the sense of abandonment, all of it seemed to dissolve in the face of her honesty. She'd come back, not with apologies or excuses, but with action. She had spent hours digging through data logs to clear his name, working quietly in the background, while he thought she had forgotten about him entirely. "I'm still falling for you," he admitted, the words coming out before he could stop them. "I tried not to. Believe me, I tried. But every time I see you at Zoe's games, every time I walk past your office, it's like nothing changed. The feelings are still there." Ivy's eyes glistened. "I know. I feel the same way." She reached across the table and took his hand, the first time they had touched in weeks. "I'm not asking you to forget what I did. I know I hurt you. But if you're willing to try again, I want to do this right. No more hiding. No more pretending we're just coworkers. I want to be with you, Josh. Really be with you." Josh looked at her hand in his, feeling the warmth of her fingers, the steadiness of her grip. He thought about all the reasons this was complicated. Zoe, work, the gossip that would inevitably follow. He thought about the risk of getting hurt again, of opening himself up to someone who had already walked away once. And then he thought about the alternative, going back to his empty evenings and his careful solitude, watching Ivy from a distance and wondering what might have been. That future seemed far worse than any risk. "We do it differently this time," he said slowly. "No secrets, no hiding. We tell people the truth, that we're together, that we're serious, that it's not up for discussion." Ivy nodded. "And Zoe? Zoe already adores you. She'll be thrilled." Josh allowed himself a small smile. "Though she'll probably take credit for setting us up somehow." The meeting with corporate happened 2 days later. Ivy presented her findings with the same precision she brought to everything else. Clear data, logical explanations, irrefutable proof that the discrepancy was a system error rather than theft. The regional managers asked questions, reviewed the evidence, and ultimately cleared the day shift of any wrongdoing. The software glitch was patched, the inventory was corrected, and life at the warehouse slowly returned to normal. But for Josh and Ivy, normal had been permanently redefined. They stopped pretending. They stopped hiding. When coworkers asked about their relationship, they answered honestly. When Maya demanded to know why she hadn't been informed immediately, Josh endured her triumphant, "I told you so," with as much grace as he could manage. When Keisha called Ivy to gloat about the blind date she had orchestrated, Ivy let her have her moment before hanging up with a smile. Zoe took the news better than Josh had dared to hope. He sat her down one evening after dinner, nervous and uncertain, trying to find the right words. Before he could finish his carefully prepared speech, Zoe interrupted him. "Is Coach Ivy going to be your girlfriend now?" Josh blinked. "How did you know?" "Dad." Zoe gave him the look again, the one that made her seem far older than 8. "You're not very good at hiding things. Plus, you stopped being sad when she started coming to our house." She considered this for a moment, then nodded decisively. "I think it's good. Coach Ivy makes really good grilled cheese." It wasn't exactly the profound acceptance Josh had imagined, but he would take it. Ivy started joining them for family dinners. She helped Zoe with homework on nights when Josh worked late. She learned which cartoons were acceptable and which ones were for babies. Slowly, carefully, she wove herself into the fabric of their lives, not replacing anything that had been there before, but adding something new, something that had been missing. The warehouse gossip eventually faded, replaced by newer, more interesting scandals. Josh and Ivy settled into a rhythm that felt natural. their professional interactions remaining separate from their personal lives. She still flagged his discrepancies, and he still grumbled about her detailed reports. But now, those conversations ended with dinner plans instead of frustrated silence. 3 months after the audit crisis, Josh made a reservation at a familiar restaurant. Table 12, the same place where everything had started. Ivy laughed when she realized where he was taking her. "You're ridiculous. I prefer the term romantic." Josh held out her chair, remembering how different this same scene had felt the first time. Back then, they had been strangers pretending to tolerate each other. Now, he couldn't imagine his life without her in it. Zoe stayed home with Maya for the evening, under strict instructions to go to bed on time and not eat too much ice cream. Both instructions would certainly be ignored, but Josh found he didn't mind. Some rules were meant to be broken. At table 12, Josh and Ivy ordered the same meals they had chosen on their accidental first date. Steak for him, salmon for her, water instead of wine. They talked about everything and nothing, filling the space between them with easy conversation and comfortable silences. The restaurant hummed around them, just as it had before, but this time the noise felt like background music rather than pressure. "Zoe asked me something yesterday," Ivy said as they finished their meal. "She wanted to know if I was going to be her stepmom someday." Josh's heart skipped. "What did you tell her?" Ivy smiled, that same small, reluctant curve of her lips that had transformed her face at this very table all those months ago. "I told her it was too soon to know, but that I wasn't going anywhere." Josh reached across the table and took her hand, thinking about all the ways this evening could have gone differently. If he had left when he first saw her, if she had chosen a different table, if either of them had let fear win. Instead, they were here, together, riding over bad memories with better ones. "Neither am I," he said. And for the first time in 3 years, Josh Brennan believed that everything was going to be okay.